My name is Gabriel, and what I'm about to tell you happened a few years ago to my friend Kayo. He always had a fear of the small back room in his house. It was cramped, stuffy, and filled with old boxes. The door was always shut, but one night it was slightly open. The rain pounded against the window and the wind howled outside. That night, Kayo told me he felt something strange, as if someone was calling him from the back room. He stepped closer, trying to turn on the light, but the bulb flickered and burned out. The only illumination came from the dim hallway light. That's when he heard it. A dull noise, something scraping against the floor. He held his breath and took a step back, but then he saw it, a shadow in the corner of the back room, motionless, but it wasn't his. Panic took over. Kayo backed away, but the backroom door started to creak, slowly opening wider. A low, distorted whisper filled the silence. He didn't wait to see anything else. He ran, locked the door, and tried to forget what he had seen. But forgetting would be impossible. After that night, strange things started happening. The backroom door was always slightly open in the morning, even though Kayo swore he had locked it. Sounds came from inside, as if something moved around in there during the night, scratching noises on the wall, always at the same time. 3:15 a.m. Kayo started losing sleep. One night he sent me a voice message, his voice shaking. "There's something in the back room. I know there is. I hear it. I see it. And last night, it smiled at me." I didn't want to believe him. Not until he decided to install a camera in the hallway to prove he wasn't crazy. But what he recorded was worse than any nightmare. The night vision camera captured everything. At 3:15 a.m., the backroom door opened on its own. A dark shadow emerged, but it had no feet, no face. It just moved. It stopped right in front of Akayo's bedroom. The next day, he wanted to check the recording, but the camera was gone. And the back room? The back room was locked again. Since then, no one has gone inside. But at 3:15 a.m., the scratching on the walls never stopped. One night, weeks after, the last recording, something changed. Kayo woke up to a weight on his chest, a suffocating pressure that pinned him down. His room was freezing. The scratching on the walls was louder than ever. And then, he saw it. The camera. It was sitting on his nightstand, covered in dust, as if it had been buried for years. With shaking hands, he grabbed it and played the last recording. The footage was distorted, the screen flickering. But between the static, something appeared. Messages scratched onto the walls of the back room, written over and over in jagged letters. "Let me in. I see you. I smiled for you." Kayo couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, he called a priest. The priest arrived that afternoon, stepping cautiously into the house. The moment he approached the back room, the air turned heavy, charged with something unseen. He placed his hand on the door and muttered a prayer. Then, as if in response, a deep, guttural whisper echoed from inside. The walls trembled. The scratches on the door darkened, like fresh wounds opening in the wood. The priest didn't hesitate. He performed a full exorcism, sprinkling holy water and sealing the room with prayers. The temperature rose back to normal, and for the first time in months, silence filled the house. When it was over, the priest turned to Kayo and said, "Whatever was here, it was waiting, watching, but it's gone now." That night, for the first time in a long time, Kayo slept peacefully. The backroom door remained shut. No more whispers, no more scratches. The terror had ended, or at least, that's what he believed. I had always been afraid of my grandparents' basement, small, damp, and dark. No one had gone down there in years, but that night, the door was open. I was 17 and visiting my grandparents' old house in the countryside. My parents had gone into town to take care of some things, leaving me alone. Outside, a storm raged, thunder echoing through the sky. I remember walking down the hallway and noticing the basement door slightly ajar. My grandparents always kept it locked, but there it was, open, as if calling to me. With curiosity tangled in fear, I stepped down the first few stairs and tried to turn on the light, but it flickered and burst. Now, my only source of illumination was my phone's flashlight. That's when I heard a dull thud from the depths of the basement. I pointed the light into the darkness. Something moved. My heart pounded. At the far end of the basement, I saw the shadow of someone, but I was alone in the house. My phone started to glitch, the light flickering. The air felt heavier. Distorted whispers filled the space. Suddenly, two white eyes opened in the darkness. At that moment, I knew I had never been alone in that house. After that night, things changed. The basement door was always open by morning, every single night. Scratching sounds echoed from within. Always at 3:15 a.m., objects would disappear, only to reappear in the wrong places. Terrified, I decided to set up a camera at the top of the stairs to record what happened in the middle of the night. That night, the footage captured something I would never forget. It was 3:15 a.m. The basement door creaked and slowly swung open on its own, and then a dark figure emerged, tall, gaunt, faceless, but with hollow, glowing eyes. The shadow stepped onto the first stair, then another, and stopped right in front of the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. The next morning, I found the camera on the floor. The footage was corrupted, but one single image remained. A dark face with an unnaturally wide grin, staring straight into the lens. Terrified, I called a priest to bless the house. He stared at the basement door and said something that sent chills down my spine. This was never just a basement. This was a portal. I clutched a crucifix as he sprinkled holy water at the top of the stairs. Distorted wails echoed from below. Something moved inside and screamed. The ritual was intense. It felt like something was resisting, fighting to stay, but in the end, silence consumed the house. After that day, the basement door never opened on its own again. I never heard the whispers again. We boarded up the door, sealed the place shut. Everything seemed normal once more. But even now, at 3:15 a.m., if you listen closely, you can still hear something trying to get out.
My name is Sophie, and for a long time, I ignored the noises coming from my attic. Creaking wood, light footsteps when I was home alone. I told myself it was just my imagination, the wind, anything, until that night. It was a rainy Friday, and I was home alone. My parents had gone out for dinner, and I curled up on the couch watching a movie. Then I heard something different. A long, low scratch, coming from the ceiling, right above me. My heart raced. I grabbed my phone and shone the light toward the attic entrance. The hatch was slightly open. I never left it open. I grabbed a stool, took a deep breath, and pushed the wooden lid. The cold, musty air surrounded me. I climbed just enough to look inside, shining the light from my phone, and then I saw it. At the far end of the attic, among old trunks and boxes, a shadow crouched watching me, pale eyes glowing in the darkness. My body froze. That's when it smiled. After that night, things changed. The attic hatch was always open by morning, even when I locked it. Footsteps and scratching sounds echoed from above, always at 3:15 a.m. My belongings would vanish, only to reappear in the wrong places. I needed proof. I set up a camera in the hallway, aimed at the attic hatch. That night, at 3:15, the recording captured something terrifying. The attic door slowly creaked open. A pale face peeked through the gap and smiled. The next morning, I found the camera, flipped over. The footage was corrupted, except for one single image: a skeletal hand reaching out from the attic. Determined to end it once and for all, I climbed into the attic with a flashlight and a kitchen knife. My heart pounded like a drum, and the air inside was freezing. I looked around, expecting to find something hidden among the boxes. And I did. A dusty old mirror leaning against the wall. It didn't reflect the light properly. My image looked distorted, wrong. And then, on the other side of the glass, I saw the figure. It was inside. Hollow. Eyes. A wide, unnatural grin. It didn't move, but I knew it was watching me. My feet felt glued to the floor. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Then I saw something even worse. My reflection smiled. And I wasn't the one who moved my lips. The attic hatch slammed shut. Everything went dark. The next morning, my parents found me asleep on the living room floor. The attic was closed, but the mirror was gone. We never went up there again. We never heard the scratching again. But sometimes, when I pass by the dark hallway, I see a reflection watching me, and it isn't mine.
My name is Dylan, and for many years I tried to forget what happened in that vacation house. But some things just can't be erased from your mind. It all started that night. My parents were out shopping in the city, and I was alone in the house. The storm raged outside. Thunder shook the windows and the wind whistled through the cracks in the old wood. I was playing video games in the living room when a noise echoed through the house. Knock, knock, knock. I stopped. The sound came from the end of the hallway, from the back room. That back room had always made me uneasy. Small, stuffy, always locked. A storage space for old things no one wanted anymore. I never went in there. But for some reason that night, the door was slightly ajar. My heart raced. I grabbed my phone and shone the light toward the back room. The darkness inside seemed thicker, as if it absorbed the light. Then it came again. Knock, 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 this time from inside the room. I held my breath. Maybe it was just the wind, but there were no windows in there. Something inside me told me to run, but my curiosity was stronger. I slowly approached until my hand touched the doorknob. I opened the door a little more. The smell of mold and old wood filled my nose. I shone the light inside. Boxes and furniture covered by yellowed sheets. Nothing more. Or at least, that's what I thought. Suddenly, my phone flickered. The screen distorted, static. Time seemed to slow down as the flickering light revealed something at the back of the room. A pair of eyes. Large, empty, staring at me from the darkness. My body froze. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Then something moved. The silhouette crawled forward, a low, rasping sound echoing in the darkness. I tried to scream, but my voice failed. My legs finally obeyed, and I ran, slamming the door of the room shut. My heart was pounding in my chest. I pressed against the wall, trying to catch my breath. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. This time, on the door to the back room. I ran to my room and locked myself inside, holding my breath. I stayed there for hours, listening to the storm, outside mixed with the soft knocks on the back room door. The next morning, my parents returned. I ran to tell them what had happened, but when we opened the door to the back room, there was nothing inside, but one thing was different. In the middle of the wooden floor, something had been scratched, as if sharp nails had gouged the surface. 3 words. Let me out. Since then, I've never gone back into that room. But every time I return to that vacation house, I know something is still there.
I've always liked the basement in my house. It was my refuge, a place where my friends and I could play video games, watch horror movies, and spend the night talking. It wasn't a creepy basement, at least not until that night. It was a rainy Friday. My friends Lucas and Daniel came over for a game and movie marathon. We grabbed snacks, sodas, and headed downstairs to the basement. The atmosphere was cozy, with an old couch, a big TV, and shelves filled with games and DVDs. The only strange thing was the wooden door at the back of the basement. My parents said it led to an old storage room, but I never bothered to open it. It was always locked. We'd been playing for a few hours when the first strange thing happened. The TV screen flickered. A brief static, but enough to make us look at each other. Daniel laughed, saying it was probably just an issue with the HDMI cable. We went back to playing, but the screen flickered again, this time longer. That's when we heard the sound, thump, thump, thump. It came from the door at the back of the basement. We fell silent, waiting. Maybe it was just the sound of the rain, we thought. But then it happened again. Thump, thump, thump this time, followed by something even more terrifying. A whisper, low, almost imperceptible, coming from the other side of the door. Lucas got up, trying to laugh, but his voice was shaky. This must be an echo or something. He moved toward the door and pressed his ear against it. "There's nothing here," he said, turning back to us. "It's just our imagination." The door trembled violently. Lucas jumped back, almost falling. Daniel grabbed a video game controller as if it could protect him. I just stood there, frozen in fear. Thump, 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 this time louder, as if something on the other side was banging to get out. That's when the lock started to turn. I screamed for us to get out, but before we could run, the TV flickered again. The screen filled with static, and in the middle of it, something appeared. A dark, faceless silhouette standing there, watching us. The basement light flickered. The air grew heavier, as if we were being suffocated. Then we heard one last sound coming from the door, the latch unlocking. The door opened on its own, creaking slowly. The darkness inside the storage room was thick, impossible to see anything. But we could feel it. Something stepped out. Lucas fell backward, trying to back away. Daniel let out a muffled scream. I felt the cold crawl over my skin. The TV turned off. The light flickered one last time. And then everything stopped. The basement was silent. We breathed heavily, too scared to look inside the storage room. The door was open, but inside, nothing. Just the empty darkness. We ran up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and stayed upstairs, trying to understand what had happened. None of us wanted to talk about it. None of us went back to get the controllers or the sodas. The next morning, I went to the basement with my dad. The storage room door was closed again, locked as always. He said no one had opened it in years, but I knew the truth. Since that day, I've never gone down there alone, because sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I still hear the thump, 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 coming from the other side of the door.